So in the first guide to Redstone, I showed you the basics of how blocks are powered and introduced you to hard power and soft power. I also showed you some of the fundamentals to creating a piston door using redstone torches, so we'll be going a little bit more in depth with all of this stuff today. But we're not here to make a piston door. These are the only things we're going to be covering in this video. More redstone dust, just going over the powered blocks, observers, redstone repeaters, and then the redstone comparator, which a lot of people find scary, but it's not as bad as you think. So as the first demonstration, I've got a line of redstone dust with a bunch of redstone lamps here, but when I power it, nothing happens. But why is that? Well, if you look into here, you see that I'm not actually using full blocks, I'm using slabs. Blocks that aren't full, like stairs and slabs, can't be powered. So when this redstone dust is not connected to any of the lamps, they're not going to turn on until I power it. This is an easier way of visualizing it. You can see that I've got a few full blocks and a few slabs, with a line of redstone dust on top. When I power it, you see that only the lamps that are connected to the full block are powered. These are the general blocks that can't be powered by redstone. This covers all the variants of stairs and slabs. Oh, and glass too. The unique thing about these blocks is that a redstone circuit can travel upwards, but it can't travel down. These are pretty useful if you want to make a redstone circuit move up quickly, or if you just want to use certain blocks that can't be powered by the rest of your circuit. Another thing to note is that redstone dust can be blocked by full blocks. For example here, if I flick this lever, the piston that's being pushed is blocking the redstone from lighting the lamp, which only lets it be lit for a small time. And here's another example of how redstone dust can't travel down slabs. And here's another example of redstone dust travelling upwards. You can treat this the same as glass, even though it doesn't look like the redstone dust is travelling up, it still acts the same way. And full blocks will also block it still. And you can also use a slab because it does not block itself. So you can just pillar up like this in a zigzag. The one useful thing I could really think of making with this is if you had two sources of power and you wanted both to activate the same thing, but also activate something separate. If I flick this lever here, the middle and the right lamp is lit, and on this one, the left and the middle is lit. So as I said earlier, these blocks can't be powered, but it's just easier to show them like this. See, they've got glass and glowstone, but concrete is able to get powered. And despite looking like a full block, observers can't be powered. But this moves us on to the next topic. Observers. Observers are unique blocks that are always looking for changes of the block in front of them. When I break and place the block, the redstone lamp is temporarily lit. This can be used even with a lever, because you can't power the observer block itself, so it won't constantly power the redstone behind it. It'll only power it briefly, as you can see. It also works when you turn the lever off, because it's seeing the lever change state. So it's not just blocks that are breaking in front of it, it's when blocks also change. And you might notice that the observer gives a very short amount of redstone power. Compare this to a button. This can be useful if you want really short pulses of your redstone rather than the button, which is quite limited in how long it fires for. Observers are also able to detect things that's invisible to the player, such as a sapling that is trying to grow, along with sugarcane, as you just saw with that piston activating twice. But also, observers can detect themselves changing. Two observers looking at each other will constantly emit a redstone pulse. Now if you watched the first video of the redstone guide, you might remember that I mentioned that these repeaters have a second stick that you can move. Let's move into that a bit. As you can see with a button here, it just powers the lamp like normal. But if you're able to watch really carefully, you might see there's a very small delay of when I press the button and when the redstone lamp is lit. It's barely noticeable. However, with the stick fully extended to the back, you're easily able to see this change. See that it takes a quick second for it to power? That's the purpose of this. Minecraft runs its worlds through ticks, meaning that every second, 20 ticks happen. Redstone repeaters by default will delay redstone by 1 tick, and for every time you move the stick, it adds an extra tick to that delay. If you wasn't really able to notice the delay that well, this is a much better example. I've got one line of just redstone dust, and I've got one line set up with just repeaters at the max tick delay. If I press this button, instantly lights up, but if I press this one, it takes a good second for it to power. This is where a very useful redstone mechanic comes in, and it takes place in nearly every redstone build. A redstone clock. What it means to have a redstone clock is for redstone to be powered at a set amount of time, infinitely. These are two examples of a redstone clock. I can power this on and off really quick. It's going to infinitely flick the redstone lamps on and off. There's a small problem with this design though that I don't like. If you try to mess with the tick delay on a redstone repeater, you can mess it up and it'll stay on forever. This requires you to break the redstone and place it back just in time. It's a bit of a messy situation. This is the same thing, but you can use a redstone torch instead. This lets you power it on and off and it'll never break. If I were to turn this lever off, it starts looping back around. Let's look a little bit into why it's doing this. So when the redstone torch powers this repeater, it takes about 1 tick for it to power. The redstone then loops into this repeater, taking another tick, which powers this block, unpowering the redstone torch, and turning this off. Then when the redstone that's now off catches up to the block, the redstone torch will then turn on again, powering the circuit again and going in an infinite loop. With this design, you can just turn it on and off as you please. Now we're moving to something that has been considered to be the scariest component of redstone, and you're not wrong. This is the comparator. Comparators are quite a complex component, but they have a few really essential features that are really helpful, and I'll try to go through them in the most basic ways to help you understand. The thing about comparators is that unlike a repeater, where it just has an input and an output, a redstone comparator has 3 inputs and 1 output. But we don't need to know about these two for now, just these two. Let's firstly understand the input and the output. I've got a small line of redstone being powered here. It's about 13 blocks long, meaning this redstone dust is at power level 3. The comparator is able to take in the power level 3 redstone, and it will also take out a powered level 3 redstone. If you were to not have this comparator here, this redstone would be at power level 2 and 1, and your next one would have no power at all. This is quite a useful feature because it lets us make some really useful things. This is where pulse extenders come in. The purpose of a pulse extender is to give redstone power a much longer lifetime. If I press this button, it's already turned off, but the redstone lamp is still on. This uses the mechanic I just explained, but let's go over it in more detail so we properly know what's going on here. When we power this block with the button, this redstone dust is powered at level 15, the maximum level, because it's closest to the button. The comparator takes 1 tick to take in that input, as with this one, and it will output another power level 15 redstone dust, the same as the input that was over here. However, because there's no comparator next to this redstone dust, this one will be level 14. These two comparators will then travel to 14 and come to this redstone dust, which then goes to 13, and it'll go in a loop until it goes all the way to 0. The more comparators you add, the longer this will take to fade out. I've added a few more comparators. Let's see what happens now. It takes a lot longer to power down. Now we've gotten used to the input and the output of the comparator, but there's a second input that I haven't mentioned that is also in the back of the comparator. The comparator is able to read storage components. For example, in this barrel, I've got 1 pufferfish, and that's turning the comparator on, which is turning the lamp on. If I were to take the pufferfish out, the lamp turns off. These are all the components that a comparator can read. For example, with an end portal frame, the comparator will be able to check if the end portal frame has an eye of ender inside. As for the 2 minecarts here, the comparator can only pick them up if they're sitting on a detector rail. Comparators can also read storage through blocks, but you've got to be careful with this, because if redstone is powering the block that the comparator is sitting in front of, then even without any items in the storage, the comparator will still be on, because it's reading this power. If I turn it off, it'll turn off.